So hello everybody, today is Wednesday the 11th of October 2023. I'm with Chris Coverdale. We're continuing on with the four previous ones, and we left off as Chris was talking about criminal prosecutions and how we can do that if under the various laws, which Chris will again repeat for us. And over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Neelu. Yeah, I think going back to the overall thing, our best way of stopping war and moving from the current tyranny to a true democracy is to stop the flow of money to the government and to halt it and redirect it into local communities. One of the ways of doing that, we've talked a bit about the tax trusts, and another way of doing it is to prosecute, to have criminal prosecutions of the main funders of the British government. And those tend to be the banks and the large corporations and the investors. And so we do have in law the opportunity to hold these people to account in court for funding genocide and war crimes and crimes against humanity, both of the military kind and the medical kind. So what I wanted to do was talk about the process for holding these people to account in court and the laws under which we can do it. So perhaps we could look at Section 15 of the Terrorism Act 2000 is the first law under which it makes it a criminal offence for a person to ask for money, to collect money, or to pay money to somebody else if you have reasonable cause to suspect that it may be used for a criminal purpose. I don't know if you're able to get that up on the Zoom. Is that possible, Neelu?
Yeah, I'm just looking for it as you speak.
Section 15, yeah.
Yeah, won't be a second if you...
Okay, right.
I can mute the recording, 1 second. Sorry, I can pause.
Excellent. Right, so let's just have a look at the Terrorism Act 2000, Section 15. These are the offences in England and Wales related to the payment of money, and that includes tax, to the government or to anybody who is suspected of using the money for the purposes of terrorism. And remember that the purposes, terrorism is defined as the use of firearms or explosives endangering life for a political or ideological cause. So the offence is, a person commits an offence if he invites another to provide money or other property and intends that it should be used or has reasonable cause to suspect that it may be used for the purposes of terrorism. That is the key first offence. So asking people to provide money. The second offence is a person commits an offence if he receives money or other property and intends that it should be used or has reasonable cause to suspect that it may be used for the purposes of terrorism. In other words, if he collects money or collects tax from me and knowing that it will go to the purposes of terrorism, it is the second offence. The last offence there is a person commits an offence if he provides money or other property and knows or has reasonable cause to suspect that it will or may be used for the purposes of terrorism. So there we have the three main offences: asking for money, collecting money, and paying money to another person. So the last point is actually quite important, Neelu. On that part 4, because that really says that this applies to every transaction, regardless of whether it is being given, lent, or otherwise made available, and whether or not for consideration. In other words, whether or not it's for a bill or a council tax bill or a revenue and customs bill or whatever. These offences, these three offences, apply to every provision of money or other property. And that's important, so that it applies at all times to all these things. So looking at that offence, it's quite clear that every time we pay tax to the British government, we know that we are committing a criminal offence under section 15(3) of the Terrorism Act. And the Revenue and Customs or the council are committing a criminal offence under 15(1) if they ask for the money, 15(2) if they receive or collect the money and receive the money, and 15(3) if they then provide the money to the consolidated fund, knowing that some of it will then go on to be used for the purposes of terrorism. So the Revenue and Customs managers and directors are committing criminal offences, and any person who hands money or asks for money or then hands the money to the government for any purpose is committing a criminal offence. So now let's relate this to company directors and bank directors. Now, what they do when, for instance, you are asked to repay a mortgage or pay interest on a debt, they ask you to do that, knowing that they will collect the money from you and they will pass some of it to the British government. So the finance company or the bank, whoever has loaned you the money and is charging you debt, is committing a serious criminal offence under section 15(1), 2, and 3 of the Terrorism Act. The same applies to the directors of large corporations who pay PAYE and national insurance to the government, having collected it from your salary as an employee. Also, it applies to paying the money to shareholders of a company, knowing that some of those shareholders will then pass it on to the government. So, for instance, if BlackRock is a shareholder of a large organization like Big Pharma, then all the money that goes through Big Pharma and the profits taken and paid to the shareholders, such as BlackRock, which then goes to the government, is a criminal offence. So we need to get right back to the point at which we start to prosecute company directors and bank directors and investors for handing money, for collecting the money from us and handing it to the government. So that really is the underlying law that we need to start using. So what I'm proposing is that we identify people in the local council across the country who are asking us to pay council tax and start to prosecute them. Now, they will say that none of the money goes for the purposes of terrorism. Therefore, they have a duty to collect it. Now, that is incorrect. It is false information. Councils pay the council's account is owned by the government. It is part of the consolidated fund, and all money that goes into it, whether the councillors like it or not, is automatically credited to the government's account for the year. And so if you look at the overall accounts for the year in the consolidated fund, you will find that they have a huge amount of income. I think it was nearly £1 trillion last year, just over £1 trillion in total. And part of that will be the council tax. Part of it will be PAYE and national insurance and VAT and all the other taxes. And they are all aggregated into one consolidated fund. So you know that when you pay money to the council, It goes into the consolidated fund. It is owned by the government, and they will use some of it by passing it to the Ministry of Defence, who use it to drop bombs and wage wars in which tens of thousands of individual citizens are killed and murdered. And that is a crime of genocide. So we know the process. So let's have a look at the second law that also applies in this situation, which is Section 52 of the International Criminal Court Act. Now, this law came into effect in 2001, and it makes it quite clear that it is an offence of conduct ancillary, so that's it, 52, conduct ancillary to genocide, etc., committed outside jurisdiction. It is an offence against the law of England and Wales for a person to engage in conduct ancillary to an act to which this section applies. And this section applies to an act that, if it's committed in England or Wales, would constitute an offence under Section 51, which are the crimes of genocide, crimes against humanity, or war crimes, or an offence under this section. So the important bit is that we know that it is an offence to engage in conduct ancillary to war crimes, crimes against humanity, or genocide. And that is the law. Now, the detail of that we can go into a little bit later, of how we prove genocide. But the important bit is that conduct ancillary to genocide includes the provision of the money, the materials, the weapons, the troops, and anything, the supplies, the training, everything that goes towards the commission of the crime of genocide. So whenever you pay money to the British government, you know, and it has been the case for the last 20 years, that at least 10% of that will be used for the purposes of genocide in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, the Yemen, Palestine, the Ukraine. All of these are criminal offences committed by the British government and funded by you, the taxpayer. So we need to stop this process, and the best way of stopping it is by doing it ourselves, by putting the money into trust until these offences, these crimes stop. And the other way of stopping it is to prosecute large taxpayers. So we can prosecute any of our leaders, financial and political, military, judicial, if we know that any of them are handing money to the government. And we know quite clearly that the big corporations, the banks, and the investors had huge sums of money to the British government, and therefore we need to hold them to account in court for those two offences. One is under the Terrorism Act 2000, and the other is under the International Criminal Court Act 2001. Technically, those are called fundraising for the purposes of terrorism and conduct ancillary to genocide. Okay, so do you have any questions on that, Neelu, before we move on?
Did you want to do section 19 or?
Yes, we could. Yeah, this is an important additional benefit, a reason why we must get on with reporting crimes to the police. Extraordinarily, in the Terrorism Act 2000, Section 19 makes it a criminal offence to disclose if you fail to disclose information to the police. Let's read Section 19(1). This section applies where a person believes or suspects that another person has committed an offence under any of sections 15 to 18 and bases his belief or suspicion on information which comes to his attention in business or in the course of his employment. Now, part 2 is that section 2 says The person commits an offence if he does not disclose to a constable, as soon as is reasonably practicable, his belief or suspicion and the information on which it is based. And that is a belief that an offence under sections 15 to 18 has been committed. So this is an extraordinary development in law in Britain. Basically, if we suspect that a company director has committed an offence under section 15 to 18, we have a duty to report that offence to the police. So if you suspect that your company directors are handing your PAYE and national insurance payments to the government, and the government is handing some of that money to the Ministry of Defence, and some of that money is used for purposes of terrorism, in other words, the use of firearms and explosives endangering life in wars overseas, then you, as an ordinary individual, must report that suspicion and the information which you have related to it to the police. So it's an extraordinary development, which means that every single one of us who is a taxpayer in this country must start reporting crimes to the police that we know are taking place under section 15 to 18 of the Terrorism Act. So if we go down a little bit further down the page, it comes, right, keep going. Right, section 5, I think it was. No, it's keep going. Oh yes, 8. Sorry, section 8. There we are. A person guilty of an offence under this section, that is, someone who fails to provide information to the police, shall be liable on conviction on indictment to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 5 years, to a fine, or to both, or on summary conviction to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 6 months, or to a fine not exceeding the statutory maximum, or to both. So, in summary then of section 19, this is a very important development in the law that no one seems to have paid any attention to. So we now have, every single taxpayer now has a duty, if they know of anyone else who is committing offences under section 15 to 18 of the Terrorism Act 2000, and that is asking for money, collecting money, or paying money, then they must ensure that that goes to the British government, that they are reporting the crime to the police. Okay, so that's the section 19 is a very important thing, and it means that we have to start doing that now. We know now that these offences are being committed by councils, by companies, by managing directors of the large organizations, by the banks, by the investors, and so on. So now's our opportunity to start reporting the crimes and holding these people to account in court for their crimes. And if you fail to do that, as the taxpayer who knows the information, and you do not report it to the police, you commit a crime which could put you in prison for 5 years. It's an extraordinary development. So thank you for that, Neelu. It is important to know about section 19.
Yeah, and then I think we were going to cover the template letters, some of the other articles, and then I can show the new website address so that people can download the templates, or they can use them to edit their own personal cases if they want to do the criminal prosecutions in their councils.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so let's have a quick look at that. The letters to the council, for instance, is a good one to do. Right. This is an individual letter that you can send to the councils in England and Wales. The reason for doing it in England and Wales is the law is slightly different in Scotland and Northern Ireland. So this relates to England and Wales, and we'll need to do slightly different ones for Scotland. So it's a letter to the councillors, headed "A Notice of Criminal Liability for Collecting and Paying Tax." And this is the point that we've just been making. It is a criminal offence to collect and pay tax. So we're notifying the council that this is a notice of criminal liability. They are liable in law for a criminal offence. I was recently informed that it's a criminal offence to collect or pay council tax. So I'm writing to ask you to establish if there are any occasions in law when taxes are excluded from the criminal offences in the Terrorism Act 2000 or the International Criminal Court Act 2001. I discovered to my dismay that every time I pay money to the council, you pay it all into Parliament's consolidated fund. Then some of it is used by the government for criminal purposes of terrorism or war, in which thousands of men, women, and children are killed. Apparently, because taxpayers know when we hand over our money to you that some of it will be used by Parliament and the Ministry of Defence for criminal purposes that injure or kill thousands of innocent people, we are aiding and abetting war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, and can be arrested, prosecuted, and sent to prison. I was also told that there are no exclusions in the legislation for taxes, taxpayers, or tax collectors. And if I continue to pay money to you or to any UK public authority, knowing that it is a criminal offence to do so, I will commit one of the worst crimes known to law. I wish to make it crystal clear that under no circumstances whatsoever will I willingly take even a small part in funding illegal warfare, acts of state-sponsored terrorism, armed attacks on other states, harmful medical experiments, or the mass murder of innocent civilians. So I'm writing to inform you that I have placed a sum of money in trust for the council. That could be my council tax. As trustee of this trust, I shall pay this money to you if I receive unequivocal proof before the 5th of April 2024 that the military and medical killings authorized by our government have ended and the conditions contained in my declaration of sovereignty and deed of trust have been met. Yours faithfully. And then I believe you need to hand over a copy, that's it. Send it with your declaration and deed of trust, a copy of that, not the original, and perhaps the lawful tax resistance article. And that will enable them to understand what it is you're talking about. So, shall we have a look at the lawful tax? Yes, shall we go through that one? This is an article you can show. I'll read through. I hope it won't take too long. History shows us that the most effective form of resistance to corrupt government is tax rebellion. Magna Carta, the founding of the United States of America, Indian independence, the end of the Vietnam War, and the repeal of the poll tax all came about as a result of tax rebellions, the refusal of the people to pay tax. Without citizens' money, governments are powerless. Today, taxpayers have an historic opportunity to engage in lawful tax rebellion. For the first time in history, demanding, collecting, or paying taxes are criminal offences against both international and domestic law. Under the laws of war, citizens are forbidden from taking part in warfare on the side of an aggressor, and they are legally bound to disobey their government's orders to support, fund, or take part in war or its preparation. This comes from the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal. The very essence of the Charter is that individuals have international duties which transcend the national obligations of obedience imposed by the individual state. He who violates the laws of war cannot obtain immunity while acting in pursuance of the authority of the state, if the state in authorizing action moves outside its competence under international law. This legal duty to refuse to obey manifestly illegal government orders includes tax demands. If a government uses money raised by taxation to wage illegal war or to attack and kill civilians, then under international and domestic law, the taxpayer's normal duty to pay tax is reversed and becomes a duty to withhold tax until their government obeys and enforces the law. Each of the wars fought, supported, or funded by Britain since 2001 in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, Palestine, the Yemen, and the Ukraine was and is illegal, and taking part in such a war on the side of the aggressor states constitutes 5 of the worst crimes known to mankind: murder, war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, and a crime against peace. Not only does the illegal use of armed force violate the Treaty for the Renunciation of War, 1928, the UN Charter, 1945, and the UN Declaration on Principles of International Law, 1970, but by taking part in the killing of 1.4 million adults and 600,000 children, leaders and taxpayers of UK, NATO, and ISAF states committed the criminal offences of complicity in murder, war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, and crimes against peace, in breach of the Nuremberg Principles and the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. Paying tax is a war crime when it's used to fund illegal war. Under international and domestic law, every citizen of a government involved in these 21st century wars on the side of the aggressor states who has paid tax, knowing that some of the money will finance warfare, is technically an accessory to the war crimes committed by their government and is criminally liable for prosecution and punishment for complicity in their leaders' crimes. Section 17 of Terrorism Act 2000, Section 17 says, a person commits an offence if he enters into or becomes concerned in an arrangement as a result of which money or other property is made available or is to be made available to another, and he knows or has reasonable cause to suspect that it will or may be used for the purposes of terrorism. And I'm using terrorism, that definition is the use of firearms or explosives endangering life for a political cause. So, to avoid prosecution, you need to divert tax into a trust account. It is important to note, however, that the legislators provided relief for taxpayers who were deceived into believing that the wars and the actions of their government were legal. Providing we end our involvement in warfare immediately and withhold all taxes from our government and its agents, we will not be punished for paying tax and funding the illegal wars and war crimes. Sorry about that. Could we go to the bottom, the note there, please? That's it. Note 8. Article 9. Article 25(3)(f) of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court states, a person who abandons the effort to commit the crime or otherwise prevents the completion of the crime shall not be liable for punishment under this statute for the attempt to commit that crime if that person completely and voluntarily gave up the criminal purpose. So if we go back to where we were, that's it. Taxpayers can prove that they have completely and voluntarily abandoned their support for the crimes of their government by diverting their taxes into a taxation trust. This is how you prove, basically, your non-liability for the crime. The funds held in a taxation trust cannot be released to tax collectors by the trustee until the terms and conditions of the trust are met in full. In this case, because our leaders and governments have broken the laws of war, the terms of the trust deed must be set to ensure that taxes are not handed over until such time as the government obeys and enforces the law, ends its participation in war and mass murder, recalls all military forces to their home bases, and starts criminal proceedings against those leaders responsible for the wars and war crimes. I'm often asked whether taxpayers can be prosecuted for withholding their taxes. The answer is no. You are upholding and obeying the laws against funding murder, terrorism, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. And if you have paid your taxes into a properly constituted trust, and the tax collector has received a copy of the trust deed and the lawful redemption criteria it contains, you have paid your tax and you can't be prosecuted for not paying it. However, you could be prosecuted as an accessory to war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide if you continue to pay tax, knowing that some of your money will be used by the government to fund its wars and the murder of innocent men, women, and children. If you continue to pay taxes such as income tax, council tax, vehicle tax, VAT, PAYE, and so on, or corporation tax, or make payments or repay loans to the government after you've been warned that it is a criminal offence to do so, and if our law enforcement authorities enforce the law rather than enforcing government crimes, you could be prosecuted as an accessory to our leaders' crimes. So it's our duty to compel our leaders to obey and enforce the law. By engaging in lawful tax resistance and diverting taxes into trusts, taxpayers regain control over their money, their government, and the law. Without the support and consent of the people, governments are powerless. No longer can they use taxpayers' funds to wage unlawful wars, murder civilians, bail out the banks, finance fatal toxic inoculation campaigns, or support the rich at the expense of the poor. By diverting tax payments into trust accounts, we can force our political, civil, judicial, and military leaders out of office and into court. By using the law to force governments to obey the law, we engage in a civil obedience campaign. So join the civil obedience campaign. Tax rebellion is the single most effective, non-violent way of forcing governments to obey the laws of war, but it only succeeds when thousands take part. If most taxpayers continue to pay tax, then governments will continue to wage illegal war. So it is down to each of us to end the carnage. If you want to uphold the law, stop the wars, and end the killing, then withhold tax. If you want the wars and the killing to continue, then continue paying tax. The choice is yours. And this is another quote from the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal. War is essentially an evil thing. Its consequences are not confined to the belligerent states alone, but affect the whole world. To initiate a war of aggression, therefore, is not only an international crime, it is the supreme international crime, differing only from other war crimes in that it contains within itself the accumulated evil of the whole. So the underlying principle of all of this, if leaders and taxpayers obey the law, nation states can never wage war. So that's a run through of that article. I think it puts the case quite clearly, hopefully. And at the back of it, you will find all the relevant laws that underpin these actions. Would you like to go through them now, or me to read them out, or should we leave that for a later date?
I think we've read most of them, but there's the ones that we haven't already covered, maybe.
Okay, so yes, let's start with the Article 25 of the Rome Statute. This is the international legislation relating to war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. Individual criminal responsibility. That means that every individual, in accordance with this statute, a person shall be criminally responsible and liable for punishment for a crime within the jurisdiction of the court if that person commits such a crime, being a war crime, a crime against humanity, or genocide, whether as an individual, jointly with another, or through another person, regardless of whether that other person is criminally responsible. B, orders, solicits, or induces the commission of such a crime. And C, if that person, for the purpose of facilitating the commission of such a crime, aids, abets, or otherwise assists in its commission, including providing the means for its commission. And that includes the money and the tax. Now, it's also important to point out Article 27. This is headed Irrelevance of Official Capacity, and it applies in 125 nation states at the moment. This statute shall apply equally to all persons without any distinction based on official capacity. In particular, official capacity as a head of state or government, a member of a government or parliament, an elected representative, or a government official shall in no case exempt a person from criminal responsibility under this statute. Immunities or special procedural rules which may attach to the official capacity of a person shall not bar the court from exercising its jurisdiction over such a person. So let's go on then. That is translated by section 52, which we went through earlier. Now, it's important to have a look at the definition of genocide. There is a law in the UK called the International Criminal Court Act 2001, Elements of Crimes Regulations. And that goes into the details of all the elements of the crime that have to be proved in court if you want to convict somebody of one of the crimes. Now, what I've done is picked out of the 60 or 70 different regulations, the regulation for Article 6A, genocide by killing. It's important to understand that all four of these elements have to be proved. So the first one is the perpetrator killed or caused the death of one or more persons. A lot of people believe that it relates to hundreds of people, but in fact, in law, it can be just one person if it's part of it can be one or more persons. Number two is such person or persons belong to a particular national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. Three, the perpetrator intended to destroy in whole or in part that national group as such, and the conduct took place in the context of a manifest pattern of similar conduct directed against that group, or was conduct that could itself effect such destruction. So just very briefly before we move on, when our leaders attacked Iraq and killed or caused the death of one or more persons, knowing that they were members of a national group and doing it intentionally rather than accidentally, and doing it as part of the drive for warfare, then they committed the criminal offense of genocide by killing and can be prosecuted in court. I'll go into more detail in that in another another Zoom meeting. So we've done Section 1 and Section 17 of Terrorism Act. It's quite useful to look at the extract from paragraph 28 of the Supreme Court ruling in Regina versus Gull. This was a ruling on the definition of terrorism. As a matter of ordinary language, the definition of terrorism would appear to extend to military or quasi-military activity aimed at bringing down a foreign government, even where that activity is approved officially or unofficially by the UK government. There's another extract that is useful. Perhaps we can go on to that one as well. Yeah. The power to arrest under Terrorism Act 2000, Section 14, and to hold for extended periods of detention prior to charge can, in principle, be used against anyone who it is suspected is or has been concerned in the commission, preparation, or instigation of acts of terrorism. Legitimately elected political figures in the United Kingdom could quite lawfully be arrested under this power. More generally, it can be used against anyone at any time. So these are some of the laws that underpin the article and the important point of prosecuting our leaders for paying tax, prosecuting taxpayers for paying tax, and ensuring that none of us contribute to these crimes which are being committed by our governments all over the world all the time.
Well, that's a lot to digest, I think, even for myself. Basically, if I could sum it up, we have national laws and we have international laws. Then when national laws break international laws, then we become liable in a sense. That's simply put. Is that?
Yes. That's very well put. And okay, we must stop paying for the crimes.
Okay. And then we've got some template letters on the website now. But what do you want to tell us overall about these template letters? I noticed that there's a few for council tax. So you write the first one to them, then they ask you again, then you write a second one to them, and then they. So how does the council tax templates work, please?
Basically, what we've done is that unfortunately, councils ignore the first letter or pay no attention to it. Most councils. And they will just come back with their standard responses and standard letters, and so we need to respond to those. So whether it's the council, the revenue and customs, or others, there are a number of example letters that can be sent. No, we've done that one, I think. Oh, sorry. So it's one of the other ones. So this. Right. Go back to one. That's it. Now, this is a letter to the Revenue and Customs that it's quite useful to send. The point being that when you get a tax demand, whether it is for income tax or capital gains tax or inheritance tax or stamp duty or whatever it is, and the money goes to the government, the Revenue and Customs, and it's important to point this out to the Revenue and Customs. So this is a letter to send to the head of the Customs. Dear Mr. Harrer, he's currently the man, I discovered recently that Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs are acting illegally, and its staff and agents are breaking the law and committing serious crimes by demanding, collecting and paying taxes into the Consolidated Fund, knowing that some of the money will be used for criminal purposes of war, mass murder, and genocide. So I write to ask you and the commissioners to stop transferring taxpayers' money into or out of the Consolidated Fund. Excuse me. Until you receive confirmation from Her Majesty's Government, Parliament, and the High Court that the criminal offences of mass murder, crimes against humanity, and genocide currently being planned and committed by Britain's political, civil, judicial, medical, and military leaders and taxpayers have ended, and criminal proceedings against individual and corporate offenders have begun. When Her Majesty's Government ratified the International Convention for the Suppression of the Financing of Terrorism and the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, Parliament enacted the Terrorism Act 2000 and the International Criminal Court Acts 2001, making it a serious criminal offence in Britain for a person to fund acts of war, terrorism, or genocide. Now that the Supreme Court and Parliament's independent review of terrorism legislation have acknowledged that the military and quasi-military actions of the British government, Her Majesty's military forces, and Britain's armed police are terrorism, it is incumbent on every adult taxpayer in Britain, including every MP, civil servant, and office holder, to withhold all funds from Parliament and Her Majesty's government until the crimes have ended and we receive incontrovertible proof that Parliament and Her Majesty's government are acting in full accord with the UN Charter and the UN Declaration on Principles of International Law. We all know that buying and then using high explosive bombs, rockets, missiles, and guns to attack targets in towns and cities, injuring and killing thousands of innocent men, women, and children is wrong and is the world's worst crime. So why do we do it? Why do normally upright and honest politicians, civil servants, military commanders, bankers, and lawyers issue or follow orders that they know to be wrong, evil, and criminal? I realize that this claim that ministers, public officials, and taxpayers are committing the world's most serious offences will be instantly denied by those involved. This automatic denial of the truth is not surprising when one discovers that Parliament, the civil service, the armed forces, law enforcement authorities, and the British public have been deceived for decades by government ministers and lawyers, lying about the illegality of war, lying about the safety of the COVID-19 vaccinations, lying about immunity from prosecution of state officials, or omitting the truth about the illegality of war. Under no circumstances whatsoever will I take any further part in knowingly condoning, supporting, or financing warfare, crimes against humanity, genocide, fraud, or any other criminal activity that leads to the injury or death of innocent men, women, and children. To this end, I am placing all taxes due to Her Majesty's government in discretionary, conditional, revocable trust for payment to the primary beneficiary only when Britain's illegal wars and preparations for war have ended, and ministers, public officials, military commanders, law enforcement officers, as well as individual and corporate taxpayers, are upholding, obeying, and enforcing the laws governing war, genocide, crimes against humanity, and their funding, detailed in the attached Declaration of Sovereignty and Deed of Trust. Should you and your colleagues in Her Majesty's Treasury, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, and Her Majesty's Government fail to meet the terms and conditions set out in the trust deed by April the 5th, 2020, that should be 4 now, I, as trustee of the trust, shall pay all the money to the secondary beneficiary and consider myself as settler and trustee, free of any duty or responsibility to pay any money, taxes, or other property to Parliament or Her Majesty's Government to support any of their activities, whether lawful or criminal. I look forward to your response, receipt of the evidence requested, and confirmation of my immunity from prosecution. Yours faithfully. And then enclose the Declaration of Sovereignty and Deed of Trust. So hopefully that puts it quite clearly to the Revenue and Customs what's going on, and it needs to be accompanied with your Declaration and Deed of Trusts, so that you can prove to them that you are no longer taking part in the government's crimes.
And I take it that they've received this from you, Chris.
Yes, but they pay no attention to it, as always. So we need to get it out to lots of people. So what you're doing now, Neelu, is helpful. I think if we can get these explanations of what's going on widely shared, a lot more people can start to withhold tax and write to the government, to their MPs, to the Revenue and Customs, to the councils, to their employers, and so on.
I mean, is there an easier way? Like, if we were to treat this actual Zoom as a petition, that people would say, "Yes, I agree with that," and they just sign the petition. Would that be good?
No, I'm afraid it wouldn't.
Oh,
Petitions have no effect whatsoever in this country, so we have to be far stronger. Very briefly, people have been protesting and petitioning and marching and demonstrating for hundreds of years about government actions, and it has no effect on the government at all. There was a big movement before the Second World War for peace, and the government, I mean, particularly Churchill, paid no attention to it at all. The same in 2003, when more than 1 million people got onto the streets of London saying no to the Iraq War, and the government paid absolutely zero attention to it at all. So even though petitions sometimes get time in Parliament to be debated, it has no effect on government policy. It is just a debate in which people go round and round and round the issues, and it has no effect on government action. So a petition is not the right thing to do. What we need to do is to share this document, this video, amongst people and ask them to start reporting the crimes, ask them to write to the council and tell them, or to the Revenue and Customs, copying the letters and other things that you've got here. So we need action on this, and not a petition or information to anybody else, just action in relation to withholding tax.
so once they've signed their declaration and deed of sovereignty,
Yep.
then they scan it and they can email it in response to any demands for any money from anybody.
Yes, along with one of these letters and perhaps the explanatory article, because if given those three things, it should be clear to the tax collector, whoever they are, that they're committing a crime, and that they mustn't. They will not get our money until they stop.
And then we know how it links in with we've mentioned it before, how the banks have continued laundering the money that funds the wars, and you mentioned about the interest on mortgages is also part of this, what we're talking about.
Yes. Yes, there's some taxes that are direct, like council tax and self-assessed income tax and things like this. But there's more taxes that are indirect. And so a lot of people will be employed, and their employer takes PAYE and national insurance from their wages every month and sends that money to the Revenue and Customs. So it's very important that we point out employees and point out to employers that they are committing a criminal offence, and they need to put the money into trust for the government and for the council until the end of the financial year. But if the things haven't been met by the end of the financial year, then the material can be, the money can be returned to the employee. So there is a letter actually to that effect for, I don't know if I sent it to you, I may have done.
Yeah.
So let's read through this letter for employees to send to their employer. Dear, and then whoever the name of the manager is, or the director, whatever it is, who you want to send it to. Notice of criminal liability for collecting and paying tax. You are sending them a notice of their criminal liability for collecting and paying tax. So it's important to remember that. I discovered recently that it is a crime under the International Criminal Court Act 2001 and the Terrorism Act 2000 for tax collectors and taxpayers to demand, collect, or pay money to HMRC if either party knows or suspects that some of the money may be used for criminal purposes, in particular to fund murder, terrorism, or warfare. it was pointed out to me that official statistics show that Her Majesty's government has used more than 750 million of taxpayers' money since 2000 to wage or support 7 illegal wars and 3 medical genocides in which at least 1.5 million adults and 600,000 children have been murdered, many more injured, and at least 20 million refugees have been driven into exile and destitution. These are the worst crimes in UK history, and they must be stopped. It is clear that by deducting PAYE and national insurance from employees' wages and salaries and transferring this money to Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, the company's employees, managers, directors, and shareholders are unwittingly funding Her Majesty's government's criminal wars, war crimes, and atrocities, and in doing so are committing criminal offences of conduct ancillary to genocide and fundraising for purposes of terrorism, which are punishable with 14 or 30 years imprisonment under sections 15, 16, 17, and 22 of the Terrorism Act 2000, and sections 52, 53, 55, and 78 of the International Criminal Court Act 2001. I realize that these facts are shocking. However, after studying the attached article and deed of trust, and realizing that these 2 criminal laws apply to all transfers of money to the government's consolidated fund, I became determined to contact you to ask you to arrange with the company's lawyers how the company could set up similar trusts on behalf of all employees and shareholders to retain PAYE and national insurance payments, as well as VAT and corporation taxes from Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, until our leaders' crimes have ended and the government is upholding, obeying, and enforcing the law. I attach a copy of the article and trust deed that brought these issues to my attention. I look forward to hearing from you. So that's a letter that can be sent to all employers, trying to get them to set up trusts on behalf of employees and themselves.
So excellent. And, so people, now this is a presentation from you, Chris, of your documents and your work, trying to get to the bottom of what it is that we need to do to stop our government spending our money on things that we don't approve of or that might implicate us under criminal international laws
Right.
inadvertently. And so what people need to do is use these templates. And the website I have is m131.webnode.co.uk for your templates. These templates are on that website now. I'll just see if I can bring it up. So it's got some templates. Sorry, it's not working very well, so bear with me. So on the downloads tab, we've got the presentations here. I'll be putting number 5 here. Then we've got the templates start. Sorry. So the template letters start here, the 12 templates that I have. So the council tax that we've done, the HMRC we've done, and then one of these we've done covered today, the employees and employers one is here. So yeah, that's just the website for people to go to, and that's the website address there. Okay. So until is there anything else you want to add, Chris? It's been an amazing amount of material, and
I think it's a lot for people to take in, basically, Neelu, and that's a good start. There are other things that we can do on a later Zoom call.
Yes, we will indeed follow up on this one, because a lot of material to digest, and we do want people to give us feedback, don't we? If they've contacted the councils, if they've had positive responses. or whatever, we need the 650 constituencies notified of this, don't we?
Absolutely.
So we need someone to take control of what all these communications are, because we're giving a message that we're aware of it. We're telling you that we're aware of it, and can you please stop it? You know.
Exactly.
Until next time. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thanks.
Amazing work. Thank you.